So the noes have it. Unlock. We now come to the second Opposition Day motion on protecting steel in the UK. Just before we go into this debate, can I say right from the very start, there are a lot of honourable members on both sides of the House who wish to take part. Once we've gone past the front benches, there will almost certainly have to be a 3-minute time limit if we're to get everybody in. Jonathan Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Labour has secured this debate today because this is a hugely important issue. And it's important not just because of the future of the Port Talbot Steelworks is integral to communities across South Wales, something I know many of my honourable friends will be making the case for passionately today, but because it speaks to a much bigger challenge that we face as a country, which is how to decarbonise heavy industry in a way which is effective for our climate objectives and fair for our communities. On this side of the House, we believe the government's push to decarbonise the steelworks at both Port Talbot and Scunthorpe in a way which guarantees large job losses and has no support from the workforce or unions risks irrevocably damaging working people's trust in the opportunities the net zero transition could bring. And we believe it is a calamitous mistake for the UK to become, under the Conservatives, the first major economy in the world without the ability to make our own primary steel. I'll give way to my honourable friend.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. Decades of underinvestment and managed decline have devastated our steel industry, as the news from Port Talbot painfully brings home. But as Unite the Union's workers' plan for steel sets out, with the right government action, this crucial industry can still be saved. So does my honourable friend agree with me that the government must invest in UK steel, transitioning Britain's remaining blast furnaces to fully decarbonised steel production, saving thousands of skilled jobs and putting Britain at the heart of clean, green steel production?
I do intend to make the case today that the UK steel industry could have an amazingly strong future, but it requires a much better approach to the one we have seen so far. I'll give way to my honourable friend. I'm cautious of the time warning, but I know my honourable friend has significant...
For giving way, and he will be aware that I have the privilege of representing Shotton Steelworks, and he has been there with me to see the high-quality products that they make in a profitable plant. But in order for that to carry on, they need to recruit and retain those quality employees. And what we've seen from this government is a government that doesn't care. And if that message gets through to the workforce, we are not going to retain those skills.
Well,
just before the opposition front bench continues, can I just make the point? I understand how this game is played. Interventions are fine, but please understand from the chair that if members intervene, they're less likely to get called. Jonathan Reynolds.
Well, I'm grateful for my honourable friend. It was a pleasure to visit the Shotton Steelworks with him last year, which was, of course, not only a chance for me to visit, but he will know that began as the Summer Steelworks in Stalybridge in my constituency. So I would very much recommend his expertise and the argument and the points that he has put forward, because, Mr Deputy Speaker, the decisions the government have made will have consequences. They'll have consequences for our national security and our resilience, and they risk leaving us exposed at a time of significant geopolitical instability. I will take one more intervention if that is okay. Actually, I'll take a government intervention and one more from the backbench. Thank you.
Jennifer giving way. If he's so determined that steel is a resource we should have nationally, why the Labour Party against the West Cumbrian coal mine, which meant we wouldn't have to bring coal in from Australia to smelt steel in blast furnaces here?
Well, of course, he will know we have considerable expertise on this matter, and that grade of coal is no good for the current way steel is produced in the UK. But I do think he's right to raise the point, because the government did justify that coal mine on that basis and now has made a series of decisions which, frankly, make that look even more absurd. So I think he's right to raise that. Mr Deputy Speaker, today I hope to make the case for Labour's plans for an alternative way forward, an approach which, by the way, is in no way based on some sort of misplaced nostalgia for the past, but which is instead based on hard-headed realities and an assessment of our national interest. UK steel should have a bright future. It is not a sunset industry, and it is central to how a modern, low-carbon economy works. And I ask the Minister today, I ask the Minister today, who I have considerable regard for, to ask her to listen and to engage, and to have a serious debate about what is about to happen, and to be willing to consider the alternative case. Let's please not trade boilerplate rebuttals or pre-scripted lines, but instead ask all colleagues to listen to the rational case being put forward, which is serious, pragmatic and important, and one I genuinely believe any Conservative could agree with. I'll take one more intervention in the chair, and I'll take my honourable friend there.
I thank my honourable friend. Many of my constituents are impacted by this devastating closure, and closing Port Talbot now makes the UK the only G20 nation unable to make steel. Would he agree that this is an appalling decision?
Well, of course, the decision has to be considered in conjunction with the one in Scunthorpe, and that is why this issue is so important and deserves the attention it has today. I do just want to say one more thing by way of introduction, Mr Deputy Speaker, which is that I do think we've already heard from several Welsh colleagues, and I do think the decision of the Prime Minister and the Business Secretary to refuse to even have a phone call with the First Minister of Wales about this matter was profoundly wrong. Anyone who is a supporter of the Union wants to see productive, effective relationships across all UK governments, and I think the Prime Minister's behaviour reflects extremely badly on him on this occasion. I'll give way to the dispatch box.
Grateful to the honourable gentleman. Does the honourable gentleman realise that I, as the chairman of the Transition Board, supporting all those workers who face the loss of their jobs, offered to speak to the First Minister last week? He's been too busy to do so far, and he's known about this potential problem since September, and only when it appeared all over the papers did he suddenly appear to take an interest and want to make phone calls.
I have to say, I think that's a pathetic response. I mean no discourtesy, but I think that is pathetic. It is entirely reasonable for the First Minister of Wales to seek a conversation with the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. I'm going to leave that there. I do also want to acknowledge that in the public gallery we have many steel workers who've made the journey here today. Men like Alan, who have worked at Port Talbot for 40 years, as did his father and did both his grandfathers, or Gary, who's worked there for 37 years, and his son now works in the hot mill. We have men and women from Port Talbot, from Scunthorpe and from Trostre, who started as apprentices. And I want to say thank you to them. Thank you for the contribution that they and their families have made to the UK over many, many generations. Last year I went several times to steel sites across Wales, and I met the workforce at Port Talbot when these plans were first announced. I think they deserve a lot better than what they're being offered right now. But at a minimum, they deserve this place to take their case seriously and to engage with these issues with the respect and consideration they require. I can give way, I think, one more time, seeking the chair. My honourable friend here, then I'll try and pick both things.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. When I was a young reporter in the Evening Gazette, the steel industry supported tens of thousands of jobs on Teesside alone. The decline started with Thatcher, and when the government abandoned Redcar 9 years ago, numbers fell to a few hundred. Steel is a foundation industry. Surely we need primary steel making in this country if it's got a real term future.
I agree entirely with the case. I'll take, I think, a government MP want to come in. My honourable friend, and then I will, I think, take no more, if that's okay.
£500 million that the government is going to contribute to Port Talbot, a total £1.25 billion. When the Business Committee visited Port Talbot, we saw a plant that was badly in need of new investment. This government is bringing forward that investment and securing a future for the steel industry.
It's a devolved responsibility. Grateful to the honourable member. I'm not ignoring it. I'm making the case it's a bad deal, and there is a better deal for the resources available that would satisfy 4 more of our objectives and give a better future to Port Talbot. I'll take a final intervention over here.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. I grew up in a region, like the Shadow Minister, ripped apart by the economic vandalism of Thatcher. So isn't it the case that the Tories are in fact repeating the lessons from the past, the mistakes of the past, claiming there is no alternative, when the reality is that steel jobs could not only be saved, but even created with a proper plan that took advantage of the global demand for steel, and especially low-carbon green steel that is going up fast.
Which agree with that case, and I think this is why this is such an important issue for Parliament to consider. And I always acknowledge that there are parts of this which are very difficult. Decarbonising industry is an urgent priority, but in some cases the technology is uncertain or it is expensive. But it is my contention that getting this right is more important than doing it quickly or necessarily at the cheapest cost. To state the obvious, we could decarbonise anything by shutting it down. And the cheapest path will likely always involve outsourcing most of our industrial production to other places. But if we do that, and this is what the government's plan for Port Talbot is, we will spend millions of pounds, we will see huge job losses, and actually we will see global emissions rise as we effectively offshore our emissions, and then we claim that is progress. And this would be a fundamental political mistake with potentially enormous ramifications for the future of the transition to net zero. And we should know this from our own past. Like my honourable friend just mentioned, when I was a child growing up in the northeast in the 1980s, there was a major transition, and we saw the end of coal mining and shipbuilding and the end of the old nationalised industries as we knew them then. And many colleagues across the UK have similar personal experiences. Now, nobody today would propose the UK should have an economic or energy policy based around large-scale coal mining. But how you manage a transition is fundamental. And in the past, as a country, we have got this wrong. Levelling up, supposedly the flagship policy from the government, is surely a recognition that the scars of those years, of the impact of deindustrialisation, are still felt in many parts of the UK today. Yet the government risks making exactly the same mistakes all over again. The decision from this Conservative government to hand over £500 million of taxpayers' money to make thousands of people redundant is quite simply a bad deal. It is a bad deal for workers, it is a bad deal for taxpayers, and it is a bad deal for the future of our industrial sovereign capability. But worse than that, it sends a message that decarbonisation effectively means deindustrialisation. And I put it to Conservative colleagues that if net zero becomes a zero-sum game for working people, it risks the very support we need to achieve that transition, because there has to be public consent for the transition, and that requires our economy to benefit from better jobs and better opportunities. This is the real politics of getting net zero right. It's not imaginary meat taxes, it's not made-up claims about 7 bins, it's whether the transition is just and fair and delivers something for Britain's workers. And the government's plans so far, Minister, are simply none of those things. The race to decarbonise is a race for jobs and prosperity. And this could be a hugely significant time for steel. I have many criticisms of government policy, as the Minister knows. I believe we have weak business investment, weak productivity and weak growth as a result of that. And I recognise a site like Port Talbot is in a challenging financial position. But the government themselves have already recognised uncompetitive energy prices need tackling. We have procurement rules in place which are seeing significant steel content from the UK in infrastructure projects. And we're getting close to carbon border adjustment mechanisms, both here and in the EU, which will be a major development. CBAMs in particular will likely completely change the economics of the UK steel industry. And there is no reason to believe the UK cannot have a vibrant steel sector. So to make this irreversible decision now, at a time when the policy background is clearly improving, seems very odd indeed. Better options are on the table, and for anyone to claim otherwise is simply disingenuous. When it comes to Port Talbot, there is a specific alternative proposal available, which is the multi-union Syndex plan, and we know is not far off Tartar's original proposals, which were known as Project Cronus. There have also been other proposals put forward. But all we ask is the government considers the issues involved and does not make any fundamental decisions that are irreversible. It is widely accepted at Port Talbot that Blast Furnace 5 is at the end of its life and it may need to close. But Blast Furnace 4 will not need to be relined until 2032. The government forcing that furnace to close now, as we await the arrival of new technologies, is an act of economic vandalism. We acknowledge electric arc furnaces are part of the answer, but we do not want to put all our eggs in one basket, which means being open to all technologies, especially direct iron reduction, DRI, which is clearly one of the most exciting possibilities. The counter-arguments put forward so far are not robust. I believe safety issues could be managed in the same way they are every day at a major steelworks. The claim that 90% of what Port Talbot does could be met with an electric arc furnace does not stand up, as key products in packaging and automotive steels cannot be produced in an electric arc furnace. At Scunthorpe, I understand the lack of sufficient grid connections and the cancellation of the first carbon capture programme back in 2010 have severely limited the options available. But again, I'm asking the government not to make irreversible decisions, to be open to all technologies and to recognise the growing importance and demand for steel. It is also important to say that we are not the only country with these challenges. Everywhere you look, other countries are doing it better. Take the Netherlands, where Tata are in negotiations with the government there on DRI technology. Or Sweden, with the collaboration between SSAB, Vattenfall and LKAB. Or in Canada, where ArcelorMittal have signed an agreement some time ago to build a new green steel plant. Or the news just in of a $5 billion investment in a new green steel plant in Saudi Arabia. Everywhere you look, other countries are seeing growth and investment in their steel sector, but we're seeing the opposite. So I put it to ministers. Why is the UK pursuing this path alone? At Business and Trade Orals, the Minister has been asked repeatedly, mostly by her own side, of the assessment the government has made of becoming the only major economy without primary domestic steel production. And her answers hint that she might get it. But the government has ploughed on regardless. So I ask her again, how can any government possibly justify making thousands of workers redundant in the name of cutting our carbon footprint, only to then pay to ship in more carbon-intensive steel from halfway across the world? It doesn't have to be this way. I say we cannot afford to blow this opportunity and repeat the mistakes of the 1980s and leave behind regional inequalities so entrenched we can still see those scars today. That's why I always say that under Labour, decarbonisation will never, ever mean deindustrialisation. I do want green steel, and I believe the workforce are our greatest asset, actually, in delivering that. And any real plan for green steel must cover the whole industry. It must be open to all technology available, and it should fundamentally be a story of new jobs, new opportunities, new exports and renewed British economic strength, rather than outsourcing our emissions and pretending that is progress. I'll give way to him just this once.
Okay, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for giving way. He's been very generous with his time. I came here this evening, and I'm sure the workers from Tata who are sitting in the gallery came here to see whether there is a genuine plan from the opposition on the table. He said that there would be. I've heard nothing specific. I've heard no costs involved. He said he wasn't interested in nostalgia, yet most of the contributions from the opposition backbenchers have been exactly that. So where is the plan B, the credible plan B, that people want to see evidence of?
I'm grateful for him. I mean, it's literally here. It's not hard to find. As ever for Conservative colleagues, Google is your friend. But what I've tried to say is, yes, there are plans available, but we will be pragmatic. We will be flexible. We are just asking not to make irreversible decisions that therefore limit the room for manoeuvre in future. In terms of resources, we've earmarked £3 billion of investment from our spending plans to deliver that, all of which is predicated on unlocking much larger sums of private investment. This government does not disagree with the case for putting money in. It's simply that the deal they're putting forward for that £500 million is not one that delivers very much at all. And what a tragedy it would be in the future to find a Britain that is building again, that is getting homes and infrastructure built, that has secure low-carbon energy generation, has a new wave of floating offshore wind, but which isn't making the steel to provide those things. Labour has a plan to build a better Britain, and we want to build it with steel made in Britain. We will only get one opportunity to get this right, and it must bring workers and steel communities with us. I'll finish with what Gary Keogh, a steelworker from Port Talbot, told me. He said the question for Tata and the UK government is this: do we want to be a nation that makes goods, or a nation that imports them from heavily polluting countries? It is not too late for Tata and the UK government to think again and change course, but time is running out. If they fail to take a different path now, the people of South Wales will never forgive them, and history won't forgive them either. There is so much at stake for all of us. Well said, Gary. So, Minister, I am asking you, quite honestly, I am begging you, consider the arguments, consider what is really value for money, and do not make decisions that are irreversible and prevent a far better outcome in future. And to Britain's steelworkers, I say I know how desperate things feel right now. I know how angry many people are. But there are those of us who get it, who understand what this industry is and why it is important, and who will, given the opportunity, deliver the future for steel and the right transition we all know is essential for our future prosperity, our security and our well-being. Thank you very much.
Question is as on the order paper. Minister Ghani.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. First, I want to express my sympathies with the employees of Tata Steel during what is undoubtedly a difficult, tumultuous time. I recognise that Tata Steel's recent announcement means significant uncertainty and upheaval, not just for them, but for their families and for the people of Port Talbot and other impacted sites. Port Talbot is built on steel, and the community is proud of its industry and proud of its workforce. After the news from Tata Steel on Friday, the people of Port Talbot are of course looking to government to provide some much-needed stability and as much certainty as possible. My focus, my Secretary of State focus, my government's focus, the Secretary of State for Wales focus has been to ensure that steelmaking continues at Port Talbot. I want to assure this House that the government is committed into just doing that, working very closely with Tata Steel, who are the decision makers here, and the Welsh Government to support those affected as much as possible. I must say that the speech from the opposition just now talked about a plan, but there was no plan. Talked about honesty, but the honest truth is that this motion is fundamentally performatory politics and a major disappointment. The risk was losing steelmaking at Port Talbot, or unfortunately helping them transition to cleaner, greener steel.
Shotton can use imported steel from India, but that is not a long-term alternative, because importing steel from halfway around the world, rolling it and then taking it up to North Wales and then exporting it to Europe is not a green footprint. Will she accept that? And can she tell us how long it will be before this arc furnace is actually built?
Steel is infinitely recyclable, and we have a glut of that in the UK. We use shy of 3 million tonnes and we export around 8 million, so we have it within the system and we can recycle it. It is the same chemical compound and it can be used infinitely. So that is the assurance there in the supply chain. As honourable members will know, Tata Steel will shortly begin a statutory consultation with employees and trade unions as they embark on a fundamental transformation project to replace the 2 blast furnaces with state-of-the-art electric arc furnaces. We can't stop the clock. Technology is here, and customers are asking for cleaner, greener steel too.
Indeed. Extremely grateful to the Honourable Lady for giving way. Isn't the truth of the matter, and I admired, by the way, the Shadow Minister's rhetoric, isn't the truth of the matter that Port Talbot is a victim of climatist militancy, of extremism? Net zero zealots don't understand that unless we manufacture in this country, we will extend supply chains and our carbon footprint will grow. Isn't that the truth of the matter?
Thank my honourable friend for the contribution. The truth of the matter is that the opposition would go harder and greener faster. At least we are providing the support that Port Talbot needs. Indeed. Thank
you for giving way. You mentioned the potential consultation. Tata have got a legal obligation to consult with the recognised trade unions in a meaningful way to try and avoid redundancies. Will the Minister ensure that these consultations take into consideration the plans that the Unite Union, the GMB and community have got on the table in order to try and save the UK steel industry?
The response to that is absolutely. I've already spoken to the honourable member who represents Port Talbot over the weekend, and I reconfirm that I will do everything I can in my power to hold Tata to account as it goes through the transition and fundamentally ensures that the consultation is as wide and as deep as it can be.
Will the Minister give way? Indeed. Isn't it the case that Tata has been losing £1 million a day, I think, at this plant, which is old? The Select Committee visited, we saw it needed replacement. With the absence of the discussions that have taken place with government, this plant would have closed some months ago.
Right, they're actually losing £1.5 million a day. That's how much they were losing. And I think a statement put out by Tata Steel made it very clear that our investment of £500 million, which is unprecedented for the steel sector, and I quote them, will enable us, this is Tata, to safeguard steel production in the UK in the long term. I know this is a difficult time, but without our investment, we would have risked losing steel making at Port Talbot. While the plan, I'll just make a bit of progress and I will take interventions. Again, I'll just make a bit of progress and I will. While the plans Tata proposed hold the potential to turn, as I said, the economic fortunes around because it's losing £1.5 million a day, and of course deal with emissions too, but it also is about adopting new technology and meeting customers' needs. I know there are huge concerns because it means job losses too. The concerns honourable members have expressed for the people of Port Talbot are our concerns too, and they are shared by members right across the House. And they'll be represented by government in our negotiations with the company. As I said earlier, we are holding Tata to account, ensuring that this transition is managed properly so that every employee receives the support that they deserve. That includes £100 million of funding for a dedicated transition board, chaired by my friend, the Honourable Member of Secretary of State for Wales, and which includes members from the Welsh Government to support both affected employees and to provide a plan to protect and grow the local economy in the next decade. Tata also announced on Friday that on top of that £100 million, they will provide an additional £130 million comprehensive support package for affected employees. You've been so patient.
I thank my honourable friend. She has been a friend to us on these benches who are concerned about our local steel jobs, and she has been a champion within government for our steel industry. So I thank her on behalf of our steelworkers for her support on that. And just urge her to be cautious in listening to the opposition, because they did, of course, more than halve the number of people who worked in the industry when they were in power last time. However, on the issue of the future, it is clear that customers will want green steel as we move forward. But does she share our concern in Scunthorpe that we also want to retain a capability of some sort when it comes to virgin steel?
Technology's moved on that 90% of everything that we need can be made by recycled steel, but there is a gap. And obviously Scunthorpe is filling that gap at the moment. And my honourable friend also mentioned a very important point, because the opposition now is talking about potential job losses. But in 1997, 70,000 worked in the steel industry. In 2010, that had fallen by 30,600, a fall of 40,000 jobs, or 56%. And the Labour leader between 2010 and 2015 did not mention the steel industry once in Parliament. So the reality is that the investment that we're making at Port Talbot is the largest that has been made for a substantial period of time. I know, even though it's challenging, without that support, there was a massive risk that Tata would have exited Port Talbot. I'll take the chair of the Select Committee.
Just want to pin this down because this was a very important intervention. On the 8th of November, the Minister said in reply to a question from the Honourable Lady for Scunthorpe that she thought it was vital for our economic security that these islands did retain virgin steel making capability. That position was a position I put to the Secretary of State this morning. She refused to confirm it. Will she tell the House today, is it her position that this country does need the ability to make virgin steel, yes or no?
I did follow the debate at the Select Committee, and I think the Secretary of State said that these decisions, A, are commercial, we'll do everything that we can, and our fundamental priority is to ensure that steel making continues in the UK. Mr Deputy Speaker, Tata's steel decision has not been taken lightly. This consultation comes against the backdrop of a decade of losses which were ignored by the party opposite when they were in power. Indeed, Tata's own managing director confirmed over the weekend, as I mentioned earlier, that Port Talbot has been bleeding £1.5 million a day. Well, just a moment. Their decision also comes with growing awareness that the UK steel industry just has to modernise. And because that is what the customers want, and the technology now exists. In those circumstances, businesses are compelled to make difficult decisions and tough changes. In fact, without the opportunity to install a modern electric arc furnace, the future of the plant itself would have been under serious threat. I will in just a moment, yes.
I'm grateful to the Minister for giving way, but the Minister herself and several of her colleagues have mentioned the losses at Port Talbot. Can I just remind honourable and right honourable members that Tartar Steel paid dividends of £1.4 billion to shareholders between 2019 and 2023, and the group have reserves of £1.6 billion. Wouldn't a sensible solution be to look at what the union are proposing, particularly unite the union in this transition plan, retain Blast Furnace 4 during the transition and build a 3 megaton arc furnace to allow them to take advantage of the dramatic increase in demand we anticipate for green steel?
Hear, hear. Well said.
Tartar have been sharing their business plans with the unions, and anxiety over the multi-union plan is that it doesn't deal with the basic economics of continuing to make steel at Port Talbot. And of course, all of us here want to ensure that steel making continues in the UK. And this was the model they've put forward to ensure that steel making continues here. And of course, the electric arc furnaces will be online in a few years' time. And that will ensure that we're using steel that's already within the UK system, that it can be recycled.
Friend for giving way. There's much talk about blast furnaces. Can I remind the House that a blast furnace simply will not function without coking coal? And West Cumbria Mining's proposal at Woodhouse Colliery would extract the highest quality grade A coking coal, absolutely fit for purpose for blast furnaces. And it seems to me like Labour are making the argument that we should not offshore our carbon emissions. That is exactly why we should be supporting West Cumbria Mining's Woodhouse Colliery, so that we can extract the vital material, the coking coal, in the cleanest, greenest way possible.
Champion of her constituency, and once highlights the lack of any sort of sensible plans that the opposition have. They don't want stuff coming in, they don't want stuff going out, they won't even support transition, and they'd go harder and faster as well. Closing the Port Talbot plant would cause immeasurable damage to the town and would be harmful for the UK as a whole, risking all 8,000 jobs Tartar Steel provides across the UK, and not to mention around 12,500 jobs in that steel supply chain. That's why the government is investing £500 million of a total of £1.25 billion towards securing the future of Port Talbot Steel, an industry which is so inextricably linked to the community's history and identity. This investment is a huge step forward, fortifying UK steel production at a time when traditional blast furnace steel making has stopped being viable. We have heard loud and clear, Mr Deputy Speaker, the calls from the unions to keep one blast furnace open during the transition for several months. Tartar held discussions with the UK Steel Committee and its advisers on this very issue. In response to those concerns, Tartar Steel have revised its proposal, continuing to operate Port Talbot hot strip mill throughout the transition period and beyond. However, their position, Tartar's position, remains that continued blast furnace production is neither feasible nor affordable, and the risk is that we would lose steel making at Port Talbot. An electric arc furnace provides us with greater resilience and ability to absorb shocks in the global supply chain by reducing our dependency on raw material imports. Quite simply, UK Steel will be ready for whatever the future holds with state-of-the-art modern equipment. Mr Deputy Speaker, just as crucially this transformation is pivotal to the government's ambition to position the UK at the forefront of the growing global economy. Alongside the UK's proposal for the Celtic Freeport and the land at Port Talbot, which Tartar expects to release for transfer or sale following the transition from blast furnaces. This investment would unlock thousands of new jobs in both South Wales and the wider UK economy. I should also remind the House that the Tartar Group is continuing to make significant investments in the UK's industries of the future. This includes its plans to open a £4 billion battery gigafactory in Somerset, creating 4,000 direct jobs, a game changer for this country that will position us to thrive in the decades ahead.
Extremely grateful. I recognise very much the case she makes for Tartar's investment in the UK. Could you just be clear with the House? Was the subsidy package for Port Talbot that we're talking about today in any way linked to the subsidy package and the decision to build the gigafactory in Somerset?
This is just another performatory politics intervention. These are separate things completely. We're talking about the future of the steel sector in the UK and in Port Talbot. These discussions have been going on for years, discussions that did not take place when the party opposite was in power. He left it alone. And as technology moved on, what we have been able to do, even though it's difficult, is to ensure that steelmaking continues in the UK, providing it with unprecedented levels of funding, because a lack of plan there was no plan presented when the members spoke at the dispatch box, and what we have been able to do is to ensure that steelmaking will continue here at Port Talbot. Understandably, members may ask why the government is not working harder to maintain these particular blast furnaces, but as was alluded to earlier on by the member opposite who spoke, that these are at the end of their life and the cost does not work anymore, nor does the needs of customers. So, I will say this again. Without the support, there would have been a complete risk of Tata not continuing to making steel in the UK. And we know that the 20th century way of producing steel is no longer fit for purpose for the UK in the 21st century. The UK's blast furnaces, just as those at Port Talbot, are reaching the end of their operational lives. Our transition from blast furnaces to electric furnaces will also increase our supply chain resilience, making the UK less reliant on imports of raw materials for steel making. Indeed.
I thank the Minister for giving way. She's making very valid points. We have no domestic iron ore mining. We have no domestic, at the moment, coal mining to feed blast furnaces. What we do have, and when I was shipping minister, I observed this, at every single port we have massive heaps of scrap steel, which is currently being exported to China to come back again as steel. Surely the best way of keeping this plant open is to use that steel, scrap steel, which is actually on our doorstep at the moment.
Conversation we have to have in the House and with the public. We have ample scrap steel within our economy here in the UK. We use shy of 3 million tonnes. We export 8 million. And we can use this scrap steel and it can be recycled infinitely, providing us with supply chain resilience, but also reducing our carbon footprint. True. And as my friend alluded to, the UK exports more steel scrap than any other country apart from the United States. We have plentiful and reliable supply of scrap metal in the UK for electric arc furnace production, making this into new steel products here for British and other manufacturers. The scrap that is sourced here in the UK, as alluded to by my honourable friend, reduces our need to import steel from China or any other country. Mr Deputy Speaker, we are backing UK-made steel, and crucially we are backing it in the right way, investing hundreds of millions of pounds to help the industry thrive in increasingly challenging global markets. We can't stop the clocks, as I mentioned earlier, technologies here as our customer demands. Our commitment is clear, from our emergency COVID support to Celsius Steel and our unprecedented package of support for the steelworks in Port Talbot. We continue to work closely with industry to secure a sustainable and competitive future for the sector and its workers. Our commitment is clear from the initiatives such as the British Industry Supercharger, which will reduce electricity costs for the steel industry and other energy-intensive industries, bringing them closer in line with the charges of other major economies. That, complemented by the £730 million in energy cost relief we have given to the steel sector since 2013. Investment, however, is the only part of the story. The government has also implemented a robust trade remedies framework to protect British businesses, British jobs and British goods from unfair trading practices and unimaginable surges in imports. Equally, we have not shied away from advocating for the UK steel industry abroad by resolving market access constraints and working with our partners in the US and the EU to boost access for UK steel imports. And I'm really proud that my department is core to that work. As well as our efforts to protect our steel industry on the international stage, the government recognises that contracts for major public domestic projects are a vital source of income for our homegrown steel producers. In the financial year 21-22, these contracts were worth more than £600 million. That's one of the reasons why last April we published an updated steel procurement policy note, which emphasises the vital importance of early engagement between producers, suppliers and buyers, so that British steel production has a fair shot at a job-creating, growth-sparing projects here in the UK. Mr Deputy Speaker, clearly Tata's decision, and any decision like this, has both national and local consequences. It is easier, as seen through the years, when dealing with huge amounts of investment, global supply chains and national infrastructure, to lose sight of the communities, the families and the individuals who are impacted. I believe that this deal is in the long-term best interest of all parties. However, I recognise that many of those who are impacted in the immediate term will feel differently. And that is precisely why we've established the Transition Board, which was announced in September. It is up and running ahead of any formal process taking place so that we can be in the best position to support the local people, businesses and communities impacted by this transition. And I know that the honourable members want to have an honest discussion about steelmaking in the UK. Without this record-breaking investment, there may not have been any steelmaking at Port Talbot. Indeed.
Thank you. The Minister's making a very important point about honest conversation, and part of that honest conversation, isn't it, that recognising that almost from day one, when Tata bought the Chorus assets, they have been looking for the taxpayer to subsidise them to keep that plant operational, from refurbishing, relining blast furnaces to direct subsidies, from Welsh Government, UK Government, strong-arming us into offloading their pension scheme. Almost from day one, they've needed help from the government to keep that plant operational. So my plea to the Minister would be that in having that honest conversation, could she please, as she is recognising this evening, keep in mind the community in Port Talbot, which is going to need massive investment to get them through this change.
Why we have the Transition Board and the sums of money made available to ensure that local communities are indeed helped. The only other change since then is the desire from customers now to want cleaner, greener steel, so there is a market for them to be using electric arc furnaces. I want to assure the House that this government will be at the side of the people of Port Talbot and other impacted sites over the months and years ahead, and we will continue to strive to secure a better future for them and, of course, for UK Steel. Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker.
Order. If everybody could resume their seats. This is a time-limited debate and we don't have much time because of the pressure of other business today. That's why there's a 3-minute limit on. The front benches will get 8 minutes each to respond. I can't give any less than that because I think it's only fair that there is a proper opposition response and a government response to that. So please be mindful when you're making interventions. Please make them short. Marion Fellows.
Deputy Speaker, and I almost want to repeat the speech I've given on steel for the last 8.5 years, but I'll resist that temptation. The biggest problem we have is that the Tory government doesn't do steel, and it hasn't done. It may be coming up with a plan now, but since I came here in 2015, the all-party parliamentary group on steel and related metals have tried to move an industrial strategy and get steel at the heart of what we do, and it has been ignored. When Tata sold the DL mill in Motherwell to the Scottish Government for £1, 2 task forces were set up in 2015. The UK Government one, which went absolutely nowhere, and the Scottish Steel Task Force, which saved DL. It's really important. It's a foundation industry, and steelmakers are, I can testify, a different type of people. The unions have done great work in coming together and to actually move the industry forward. I agree with this Labour motion, but I do have some doubts as to what a Labour government would do, because there's been so many tosses and turns and U-turns in what they're saying. But can I go back to Port Talbot? We in Motherwell and Wishaw and the surrounding areas know only too well the cost of the closure and with huge redundancies of a large steel plant, the economic and social cost. The fact that manufacturing jobs are only the start of the impact of this closure, of these job losses, and they will be felt right across the Welsh economy. Under the plan, it was hoped, the union plan, the multi-union plan, it was hoped that Tata Steel could transition Port Talbot towards greener steelmaking over a longer time frame. Tata Steel intends to replace existing manufacturing processes with an electric arc furnace, which we know makes steel from scrap and requires a much smaller workforce. I find it hard to believe Tata will invest £750 million to finance the restructuring, backed by £500 million £500 million from the UK government. And yet, there are all these jobs are going. It's almost as if the government is paying Tata to make people redundant. A statement by the GMB and community who drafted the multi-union plan noted, and I agree, it's an absolute disgrace that Tata Steel and the UK government appear intent on pursuing the cheapest instead of the best plan for our industry, our steel workers and our country. We in the SNP are clear that we recognise the need to reduce our emissions and reach net zero targets, but we are equally clear it's vital that the individuals and communities that are most impacted by the green transition must be at the heart of decisions made by governments. A just transition must have fairness and transparency for the workers affected at its heart. And in the case of Tata Steel, it's clear the impact of the closures on the workers has been an afterthought. Diane Coyle, the economist, says, UK industrial policy has been characterised by frequent policy reversals and announcements driven by political cycles, and there is an enduring inability to effectively coordinate the multiple public bodies, departments and levels of government responsible for its delivery. Those of us with steel industries in our constituencies can attest to this. There hasn't been a proper industrial plan in all the time I've been here. Last week, my First Minister highlighted that independence offers an alternative to lack of direction and ambition with an industrial policy, and that is what an independent Scotland will have, an industrial policy which has been lacking here since I've been here in 2015. The fact that the replacement to the blast furnaces in Port Talbot won't be operational until 2027 at the earliest raises concerns from both a national security and environmental perspective. It's completely meaningless, as we have already heard, to close the furnaces in Port Talbot in an attempt to lower emissions if we're then going to be reliant on equally energy-intensive steel imports from other countries till at least 2027. And if the UK government doesn't take measures to ensure the UK is on a par with the EU when it comes to investing in green technologies. And actually we're going to, as has already been said, be importing from India and China, two of the most polluting countries on the planet. The UK government will also be the only G20 country that doesn't produce its own virgin steel. This clearly poses concerns from a national security perspective. And Unite recently summed up this ludicrous situation, noting the UK government needs to invest in British industry in order to defend workers and communities as well as our industrial base and our national security. Instead, they're giving Tata hundreds of millions of pounds to fund the plan to cut jobs, cut capacity and give more business to their plants in other countries like India and the Netherlands. How on earth is this acceptable? The shocking decision made by Tata in Port Talbot may not have a direct consequence on steelworks in my constituents, the DL Works in Motherwell. However, the decisions being made at British Steel Scunthorpe and Port Talbot puts the future of steelmaking in the UK at risk. I'm happy to pledge my support to the alternative plan put to Tata with the backing of Industry Experts Index by both community and GMB trade unions. The market need for UK-produced steel has increased as projects within the UK are asking for UK content. DL Works markets themselves as that steel rolled in UK, produced from steel made in Scunthorpe. If British Steel goes the same way as Tata, we lose the only remaining UK steelmaker who can supply steel suitable for plates, and that's just madness. When Tata closed DL and Clydebridge, the UK lost its ability to roll plate for submarines and for other industrial purposes, and for things like wind turbines. This Tory government doesn't understand manufacturing. As the APPG and steel and related metals has been pushing for years and years and years. They spent very little time in the early days. I noticed the Minister mentioned the the reduction in electricity costs. How long did it take this government to come forward with that plan when for years we were telling them we couldn't be competitive and that was going to have an effect on British steelmaking? Mr Deputy Speaker, there are lots of people still waiting to speak. What I'll say is, in Motherwell and Wishaw, hearts go out to folk in steel who are losing their jobs. We know how it feels. We know how long it takes to build your community back up again. We in the SNP, Mr Deputy Speaker, support this motion.
Holly Mumby-Croft.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And clearly the news from Tata Steel is extremely concerning, and it leaves Scunthorpe as the last place in the whole of the UK to be able to make virgin steel. It is incredible to me that I am here again making the argument to retain a virgin steel making capability here in the UK. And I know there have been challenges around the House on those views, and I want to go into detail briefly on some of those challenges. Some people think that whatever we need, we can make in an electric arc furnace, and it's absolutely true that the range of products is increasing all the time and it will expand. But of course, those products are dependent on scrap, and all scrap is not equal. We may have the correct tonnage of scrap in this country, but no one is yet to convince me that it is the correct quality of scrap, and that is a really important point that we need to recognise. People have said that we don't export iron ore from this country. That is incorrect. We do export iron ore as a country. People say that we don't have coking coal capability in this country. That is incorrect, because there's a perfectly good metallurgical coal mine in Cumbria waiting to be used. Some will make the argument about reducing the carbon footprint of steel products using a purely electric arc model, to which I would again point out that many products melted in an EAF require an input of virgin steel in the mix. And people on the works have told me, and I listen to them because they know their stuff, they tell me that some of those products that they want to make in an EAF will need 30% virgin steel in that mix.
Will she give way?
Yeah.
I thank her for giving way. Isn't it clear then that, given what she said, it is vital that the government negotiations with British Steel retain that virgin steel capability?
My honourable friend knows a great deal about steel, and he makes a really good point. He's absolutely right in what he said. And I think we need to remember, if we aren't making that virgin steel here in the UK, it will come from someone else's blast furnaces, probably from the other side of the world. We will have no control over how the emissions and the production of that steel happens. We will have no control over the welfare of the people who make that steel. And then it will be put on a ship. And it won't be a ship with a sail, it'll be a ship with a diesel engine. And it'll drive over here, where we will throw it into our electric arc furnaces to make that mix.
My friend's absolutely right, and of course that's the point. The more that we make in this country, the food we grow, the products we produce, our manufacturing base is essential, not just for our economic resilience and well-being, but also if we want to move to this wonderful carbon-neutral future that's so beloved of so many.
My honourable friend is absolutely correct. And put simply, unless we are going to stop using virgin steel in this country, then we should have the ability to make it ourselves so that we can take responsibility for those emissions, we can take responsibility for those production methods and for the working conditions of those who make those products. My right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Defence, last week remarked that we are entering a pre-war world. I believe that a strong, or at least an in-existence, steelmaking industry is a core part of our nation's defence capability. We may choose to buy the steel we need for our defence from other countries, whether I agree with that or not, but resilience isn't only about what you choose to do, it's about what you may need to do in the future, or what you may have to have the capability to do should the need arise. On the 18th of September, I asked my honourable friend the Minister if she agreed that for national security reasons alone, as was referenced, we must ensure that we retain the capability to make virgin steel in this country. And I said in my UQ that was confirmed to me by the Secretary of State the very same day, and I took contemporary notes of that conversation. My honourable friend commented back to me that I was correct on the importance of virgin steel. She said, obviously, we need a place for virgin steel and that it was in my constituency. I have no problem with building electric arc furnaces. It's a good idea, but I passionately believe that the UK should retain, at least in the medium term, some blast furnace capability alongside it. And after the sad news in Port Talbot, that has to be in Scunthorpe. On the 6th of October, British Steel set out its plans. Their proposals, which they say are subject to appropriate support from the government, they are the content of the negotiations that my honourable friend is working so hard on. They talk about installing 2 electric arc furnaces, one in Scunthorpe and one in Teesside, and they propose maintaining current operations until a transition to electric arc steelmaking. And I want to be crystal clear. I expect the company to keep to its word on this. If we are going to give British Steel hundreds of millions of pounds of our money, of public money, we need to ensure they retain those blast furnaces until the transition. And in short, it must be written into the deal. I do not want to see what is happening in Port Talbot, the sad events in Port Talbot, happening to my people in Scunthorpe. I do not want to see blast furnaces switched off early and steel being brought from abroad and rolled in our mills. I want those blast furnaces on for as long as possible, maintaining jobs and keeping options open so that we can explore alternative technologies as other countries are.
Stephen Kinnock.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, the Port Talbot Steelworks is the beating heart of our community. Generation after generation have worked in that steelworks. Port Talbot is the steelworks, and the steelworks is Port Talbot. Every time I go into that steelworks, though, I don't see something to be sentimental about. I see a hotbed of innovation. I see a workforce that is deeply committed to change and ready to embrace change. So this is not about some kind of request for charity. This is not about hands out. This is about asking for a level playing field. This is about saying that we make the best steel that money can buy. But for 14 long years, we've been competing with a hand tied behind our back. For 14 years, we have been forced to pay twice as much for our energy as our French and German competitors. For 14 years, we've seen government contracts going to foreign steel companies. And for 14 years, we've seen our government completely failing to support its steel industry in anything like the way that our competitors are doing. So let me be absolutely clear. When we look at this deal that is now on the table, it doesn't work for jobs. It doesn't work for decarbonisation, and it doesn't work for our national security. On jobs, 2,800 jobs going and £500 million of taxpayers' money to pay for that privilege. On decarbonisation, it's based on importing millions of tonnes of steel from India, where steel production is 30 to 40% more carbon intensive. And I'm not sure if anyone's noticed, but India is 5,000 miles away. So the carbon footprint is going to be huge. We are literally exporting jobs to India, from Wales to India, and importing carbon from India to Wales. So I urge Tata Steel to look again at the multi-union plan. I urge Tata Steel to take the bridge, not the cliff edge. Their deal is a cliff edge that will send our workforce, our proud communities, over that cliff edge. That is not something that we can accept, Mr. Speaker. We have to recognise that the trade unions have put together a compelling plan, a plan that keeps one of the blast furnaces going whilst the transition is taking place to an electric arc furnace. That is the right way, the balanced, sustainable way of doing this. Our country needs its steel. Let's value it. Let's stand up and fight for it.
Alan Katz.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. There's no question that this is an extremely worrying time for families in Port Talbot and for the community at large. I know the community extremely well, and my father was a welder at the Boss plant in the steelworks for more than 30 years. Port Talbot is a community where everyone knows someone related to the steelworks in some sort of way. And the scale of the impact that it will have on the community cannot be underestimated. It's not just the jobs themselves. There will be the contractual jobs. There will be the associated roles with those contractual jobs. There is a significant multiplier that follows on. But of course, this is not the first time that we've been in this position or where the steelworks have been under threat. I can remember tens of thousands of people working there when I was growing up in the 1970s. But the reality is, in 2016, we faced a similar position where Tata planned to close the plant, but in opposition to what the government is now claiming, the UK government proactively worked with Tata in order to encourage a sale, and in the interim the price of steel rose, which has now given us a much longer lifespan of the site. I want to point out, though, that the commitment that Tata has shown is significant and needs to be recognised, because it has lost millions of pounds over the time. And in the close of 2018, I went to Mumbai to meet the Chairman and Chief Executive of Tata as Secretary of State in order to express my concern that the price of steel at that time was falling, and I wanted to know what their plans were. So that is the proactivity in which the government has maintained an interest all the time in terms of seeking to support the industry and support the steel. I will give way to my...
I take my honourable friend point about commerciality, but the truth is we can and should protect those core industries that are at the heart of our manufacturing capacity. And if you open yourself up to cheap foreign imports with huge environmental costs, you are bound to end in a situation of the kind he describes. So I thank him for his work, and particularly for my friend from Scunthorpe's work, but actually it's for the government to prioritise British jobs and British manufacturers.
Makes an extremely important point, and I strongly agree with him, and that is the proactivity the government has sought to pursue. I should correct the record. It was in November 2019 that I went to Mumbai to meet Tata. But the reality of the position, Mr Deputy Speaker, is that every time a member in this House, on any side of the chamber, has called for us to go further and faster and to be ahead of the curve in the green transition, another nail has been put in the coffin of heavy industry such as Tata in Port Talbot. It's the reality of the position, and there will be many times that when we've been passing climate change legislation here, there will be many members opposite that are now seeking to defend the jobs that have been saying that the government isn't doing enough in terms of our green transition. I also want to make the point that the £500 million is a significant sum. Don't play it down, because it is significant, Mr Deputy Speaker, because we've also got to remember that this is a devolved responsibility. Pre-devolution, this would be coming out of the Welsh bloc. And we all know that since 2016, the Welsh Government have done nothing to reinvest in the plant when we managed to save it from closure at that time. So I find it a bit churlish when the Minister in the Welsh Government says he needs hundreds of millions. Well, the reality is those are the people calling for further devolution, for further responsibility, but the ultimate is there's no accountability for the decisions, because investment in industry is a devolved function. But thankfully to the Union, and thankfully to the UK Internal Markets Act, the UK Government can invest in the steelworks in Wales, and this is the act that the members opposite voted against, and the Welsh Assembly wouldn't even give a legislative consent order in order for it to pass. Within the limited time that I have, I want to point out this is a 2 blast furnace site. Having 1 blast furnace operational simply makes it even more inefficient to lose more money. I think my honourable friend from Scunthorpe highlighted a really important point about arc furnace, and I haven't heard the automotive sector say that they are content. And finally, I will hope we will have a development corporation in order to save the economy.
Liam Byrne.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I just want to add my voice to the chorus that is asking the Minister to rethink this strategy and this deal comprehensively, because it feels like that at the heart of this debate is a simple truth. The simple truth that what the government has offered us is a half measure, and it's a half measure that now threatens job security, it threatens economic security, and it threatens climate security. And that, frankly, is a price that is not worth paying. The threat to job security has been well laid out by honourable members this afternoon. This is not just 2,800 jobs at the steelworks itself. There are 3 times more jobs than that will be lost because of the economic shock to the community. So here we have a situation where £500 million of taxpayers' money is being forked out, and up to 12,000 people are going to be thrown out of work. But the second point that we must not let the Minister elide this afternoon is that there has clearly been a change of government policy around whether this country needs its own sovereign capability to make virgin steel. The Honourable Lady for Scunthorpe spoke brilliantly and eloquently about precisely why we need to keep this capability in this country, and she was right to say, in response to her urgent question in November last year, the Minister gave the House a very clear impression that she was going to defend a policy of His Majesty's government that we are going to retain in this country sovereign capability around virgin steel making. And yet, when I asked the Secretary of State, not once, but 3 times this afternoon, whether it was the policy of His Majesty's government to keep that capability in this country, she declined to answer on all 3 occasions. She said that this was not a decision for government to make, it's a decision for industry to make, and in her words, we may as well be trying to encourage people keeping typewriters. I do not think that is an appropriate response on what is a fundamental question of economic security. The third point, of course, is on climate security, which my honourable friend laid out very clearly. Tata have been very clear that they are going to honour their contracts by importing steel from India. We know that that is 40% more carbon intensive than steel made in this country. We know that other imports may now come in from China, where about 70% of the power is from dirty coal. So this is bad for job security, it's bad for economic security, it's bad for climate security. At the very least, we could have expected this government to lay out a better plan that dealt with questions like how are we going to ensure the scrap supply, given that we now export 77% of our scrap today, and we don't have a strategy for making sure that scrap is kept here if the future is indeed electric arc furnaces. We haven't had a strategy about how we keep DRI technology here. And so the Tata are proposing to build that capability in Holland. So £500 million goes out the door, job security goes down, technology goes to Holland, and dirty steel comes in. That's a bad deal, and it needs rethinking.
Morden.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and that was a brilliant contribution from the Chair of the Select Committee. This afternoon, steelworkers from Port Talbot, from Llanelli and beyond are up in the gallery, come here today to ask the Government to step up after last week's announcement from Tata. So on their behalf, can we implore ministers, before it's too late, to pursue all avenues to secure a longer, fairer transition for our industry that supports our steel industry and supports our jobs. We need a meaningful consultation with the unions, and we need full consideration of the alternative options the trade unions have put forward, because we want the best deal for steel. We don't want the cheapest deal for steel, and that is what we have before us. Last, I will give way.
Can I thank my honourable friend for giving way? She's a great champion for steelmaking in Llanelli. Does she agree with me that the negative impact of the government's plans for steel in South Wales will be massive? Also, is there anything she can say about whether or not the product of electric arc furnaces will be suitable for the Zodiac line at Llanelli?
I thank my honourable friend for that intervention. It will indeed be. Last week's announcement was devastating for Port Talbot, for the people from Newport who travel to work there, for wider South Wales, but also devastating for communities across South Wales. There were 2,800 workers affected over 18 months in Port Talbot, and also Tata expect a further 300 roles could be impacted in around 3 years' time at Llanelli in Newport East. And to come on to my honourable friend's point, this would leave the Zodiac line, which produces world-class automotive steel. It was the best processing line in the world when it was built, and it remains one of the best. But as the unions have highlighted, Zodiac will in the short term be reliant on imports, and there remains big questions about the quality of the steel produced in the electric arc furnaces route. These are high-value products, and it is a precarious position for Llanelli. As has often been repeated in recent days, however the government dress it up, this government is giving Tata 500 million to make 3,000 people redundant, and in doing so, ending our ability to make virgin steel, the only major economy in the world to do so, and that is shameful, leaving us reliant on imports at a time when demand for steel, the steel we will need desperately for our green infrastructure, is only growing, relying on imports at a greater cost, as the honourable member said earlier, coming over here in diesel-fuelled vessels, shipped thousands of miles from countries with lower environmental standards. It doesn't have to be so. As others have said, there is an alternative plan proposed by the steel unions, and we pay tribute to them and the fight they put up on behalf of their members. The Sindex plan is credible and based on a phased transition over a decade. Officials of Tata have acknowledged to unions that the union plan was serious and deliverable, but wouldn't commit to the extra funding. The government must step up, as other countries are doing. In fact, there can't be a developed country in the world that approaches this in a worse way than this country does. And on this side of the House, we will. A general election cannot come soon enough for our steel industry. We have long pledged the £3 billion fund to decarbonise UK steel production, but this government's plan is not a serious plan. It is yet another sticking plaster from a government without a proper industrial strategy. 12 steel ministers since 2010, 6 in the last 4 years alone. And just to quickly address some of the comments made by the Secretary of State for Wales this week, at a time of awful news, some of the attacks that he made. This deal was done without Welsh Government or trade union support. Welsh ministers have repeatedly contacted business ministers. The First Minister tried to get a phone call on Friday with the Prime Minister and wasn't allowed to do so. This Welsh Government has used all the levers that it has, but we must not allow this Government to make irreversible decisions, because for Wales, steel is part of Wales's history, but it should be and is also vital to our greener future.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I declare an interest as a member of Unite, and I totally support the union's plan to move forward. I want to congratulate my front bench team on bringing this debate forward. This debate should not be about political sides. This should not be about taking sides from the government against the opposition because we brought this debate. This debate is about national security. This debate is about national industry. This debate is about national prosperity. This is what we should. I congratulate the member from Scunthorpe who stood aside from that and looked at the real issue. The issues too here in terms of the blast furnace technology. I am one of the very few members in this place, Mr. Deputy Speaker, who served in an apprenticeship, worked in a foundry, and have understood the issues that we're talking about. The issue of virgin steel is hugely important, as has already been said by the Honourable Member for Scunthorpe and other members. Because when we are talking about defence manufacturing, which is what we want to do, we want to increase our defence manufacturing. We have the AUKUS deal, where we want to build submarines in conjunction with Australia, in conjunction with the United States. That will have a huge impact. By not doing that, we will not have the capability, by not having blast furnaces to do that. When you recycle, as it's been said before, and I'll just repeat this, already produced steel, it has significant amount of impurities because of the uses it has. And you can't turn that into virgin steel. So you have to go back to this to be able to manufacture and to deal with how we produce that steel. If we don't do that, we will not be able to meet our defence commitment and our engineering and manufacturing commitment, which is not what the United Kingdom wants as a manufacturing company, as a prosperous industry that we want to take forward to be able to do that. As far as I'm concerned, Mr. Deputy Speaker, this is a deal, a grubby deal by Tata. All they wanted to do was get hold of our steel industry, hijack it, get rid of our workers, take them off in line, and bring steel back from the highly polluting Indian plants that they have. I know it's not been said in here, and I want to be clear that our steel industry, our steel workers, as somebody who's worked in the industry, do not see that our people should be allowed at the altar, sacrificed at the altar of the so-called green technology, which is what they're pushing, but the actual, I think the intention is somewhat quite different from that, and we need to realise as a nation that that is our security, that is our prosperity, and that is what we need to do. Thank you, Mr. Deputy.
If people could shave about half a minute off their speeches, we can get everybody in, otherwise we won't. Neil Griffith.
Thank you very much. It's both tragic and shocking that we're faced with the potential closure of the last blast furnace in Port Talbot before greener technologies for producing primary steel are developed and operational, even before the proposed electric arc furnace is up and running. And this Conservative UK government must bear their share of the responsibility for this appalling situation. The government boasts about this grubby little deal they made with Tata in September, spending £500 million to lose 2,800 jobs in Port Talbot, to leave the UK as the only country in the G20 without its own steel-making capacity, at the mercy of world markets with the risk of price hiking, not to mention the national security risk of losing our own primary steel-making capacity. Instead, the government should have been negotiating a proper deal like the multi-union plan to ensure a just transition, protecting jobs, keeping the blast furnace going until other production means are fully up and running, recognising that the electric arc furnace can only be part of the solution. Yes, let's recycle more steel in the UK, but recognise it's not suitable for all our needs. Developing the green technologies such as hydrogen and direct reduction of iron to do the primary steel production. As Labour have proposed, committing £3 billion, not £500 million, but £3 billion, to work with the industry to make that just transition a reality. Now, the tin plate industry is synonymous with Llanelli. It's a central part of our industrial history, and today's tartar plant in Trostre makes a range of different materials that go on to be used in things like food cans and aerosols. Currently, we receive our steel from Port Talbot, just some 20 miles down the railway track, which makes good economic and environmental sense. Tata tell us that when they close the blast furnace, we will be importing steel. Imported steel which will be made in blast furnaces abroad, so there will be no saving in carbon emissions, quite the opposite. Process abroad will be much dirtier, and then of course the costs and emissions from transporting the steel to Trostre. So the challenge will be to source appropriate quality of steel to satisfy Trostre needs. And as Trostre makes a number of products and serves a number of different customers, that means steel of the right quality to satisfy all those needs. Now, we will be very much more vulnerable to logistical difficulties and price fluctuations if we have to import steel. And if there's a shortage of supply, then foreign producers may well prioritise their home customers. And as for recycled steel produced in the electric arc furnace, when it eventually comes into production, there's still a lot of work to be done to assess its suitability for the different products that Trostre produces and its acceptability to our customers. It may be that some products can use electric arc furnace steel, but that may depend on the quality of the feedstock that's put in. And there is a strong case for having two smaller electric arc furnaces to provide those different qualities. And then there's a challenge of sourcing the feedstock, and not just sourcing it, but sorting it, trialling it, and all this takes time. In the meantime, we need tartar to keep the blast furnace going, and the electric arc furnace should be only seen as part of the solution, the other part being the development of the green primary steel making. So I pay tribute to the trade unions, and we now need tartar to work with the trade unions.
If people could shave time off, otherwise everybody's not going to get in. Jamie Stone.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. You may be wondering why on earth a member for the northernmost mainland constituency in the UK, very far away from Port Talbot, is taking part in this debate. But a bit like the honourable member for Birmingham Perry Barr, I actually got my fingers dirty working in an oil fabrication yard at a place called Nig, and some of the mightiest structures in the North Sea were built there, and I'm proud to have worked there when I did. Now, those structures, which are still there working today, they were made out of the best of British steel. It didn't come from anywhere else, it was made out of British steel. Now, I thank the government for the decision to allow the Commonwealth of Firth in my constituency to become a green free port. And one of the great dreams that we have where I live is that the skills that we still have locally, those welders, those fabricators, those riggers, who still are of working age, that we could start to fabricate floating offshore wind structures in this yard once again. That is our dream. At the height of when I worked in that yard, 5,000 people worked in it. And we dream of seeing the flash of the welder's torch and the clang of steel once again. But to do that, we're going to need the best of British steel. Not rubbishy stuff, but the best that will stand up to the mighty storms of the North Sea. So what I'm saying, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is yes, I hear the impassioned pleas about making virgin steel in the UK. But I'm talking about further down the line where we can use it and where we want to use it desperately, desperately badly. Mr. Speaker, Deputy Speaker, I'm going to keep this short, but we've fallen a long, long way back. One of the shattering statistics is that while we were still in the EU, in our last days there, it was a fact that the UK had fallen to being the eighth in the whole of the EU in terms of steel production. We were actually behind Belgium. This is the country of Isambard Kingdom Brunel. This is the country that built the 4th rail bridge. This was the country of steel, and it was steel that made this country great. So, I support the motion today with some great passion. Believe you me, it has my full support. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Liz Saville-Roberts.
Steel is a strategically important industry for Wales and for the entire UK. It's vital for supporting the green transition from energy generation to electric cars. This isn't just about a fair transition, it's about having the security of supply essential to having any transition at all. There is no sense, no rational strategy even as we enter the new era of great British nuclear and small modular reactors in places like Trawsfynydd, that this government commits its successor to buying thousands of tonnes of new steel from where? From China? And we don't even know what assessment this government has made. Does the UK need security of supply in being able to produce virgin steel, yes or no, in future? And what is the government's role in that respect? Mr Deputy Speaker, Plaid Cymru has called for action to ensure that ownership of the Welsh steel industry should be returned to Welsh public control. This would involve nationalisation, then recapitalisation through green bonds, with a view to mutualise and to create a Welsh steel cooperative. We could save the banks in 2008. Why can't we save steel now? Look at Germany, whose government spent £2.6 billion in state aid to steel producers for decarbonisation projects only last year. This is the scale of intervention that we need. We must also learn from other countries such as Spain, Canada and Sweden, who are already investing in their capacity to produce primary steel through green hydrogen furnaces. There are lessons here for Wales. There are suggestions that a closed-loop cycle could be created in South Wales, whereby floating offshore wind is not only used for electricity, but to make green hydrogen for local heavy industry, including steel production. If we had better control over the Crown Estate, we could tie these procurement requirements into those contracts. We could put local procurement as a priority. Where is the vision? Where is the vision that only central government can manage as we stand with the state of the nation and the United Kingdom? These are the sorts of exciting opportunities we should be grasping now in Wales. Yet we're being let down once again by a Westminster government who are intent on stripping Welsh assets while leaving the Senedd to bear the costs of communities and individual lives thrown on the scrap heap. Yes, the Labour Party is also promising a transition fund for the steel industry, but how can we ever believe this will be implemented as they continue to scale back on their £28 billion green investment pledge? Solutions from Westminster are a dead end. Only with control over our own resources, such as through a Welsh steel cooperative and the devolution of the Crown Estate, can Wales embark on its own journey towards a greener and fairer future. And to close, Mr Speaker.
I'm afraid time's up, sorry. Stephen Doughty, I do apologise.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I declare my interest as a member of the GMB and of the all-party group. And I have to say, Mr Deputy Speaker, how utterly frustrating and disappointing it is to be here as a former Shadow Steel Minister, hearing the same arguments that we've all been putting on this side and across the House from some honourable members on these issues for a decade in this place, that the government simply haven't listened to. They've been asleep at the wheel. There's been no industrial strategy. There's been no vision for the future of steel. And there's been a revolving door of ministers in and out of government on this. And I'm deeply frustrated after all those arguments that we've made in good faith that we've come to this point. This is the totally wrong approach for the proud workers. I was privileged to meet outside Parliament today. You were with us in the gallery. It's totally the wrong approach for the economy of South Wales. It's not just the workers and the jobs directly at Tata, it's also the related industries, the electricians, the engineers, the rail workers, the hauliers, all of that interconnected economy which is so crucial to the backbone of South Wales. the cafes, all of those families that rely on those highly paid jobs, workers who are willing to embrace change, as my honourable friend from Aberavon said, but now face being let down by this government. It is totally the wrong approach when it comes to carbon emissions. We've heard how it will lead to imports of lower quality steel, higher carbon steel, steel that's coming in with higher carbon emissions on the transport, as the honourable member opposite set out so clearly. And it's the totally wrong approach for our national security. She was absolutely right to raise those concerns about our defence industry, about the needs for speciality steels. I know what an electric arc furnace can produce, Mr Deputy Speaker. I have one in my own constituency. They're an excellent company and they do excellent work providing steel to our critical national infrastructure, but they cannot produce all the steels that we need for our economy. And in a time of geopolitical risk, and in a time when our supply chains are under threat, and in a time when we want to invest in new green technologies, and at a time when we face threats from major countries around the world, to be abandoning our capacity, our national security, our foundational industries is utterly irresponsible, Mr Deputy Speaker. I want to praise my honourable friend from Aberavon for all he's been doing to stand up for his workers, one of friends from Newport and others. I want to praise my constituency colleague, the Welsh Economy Minister, Vaughan Gethin, and indeed the First Minister. And I have to say this to the ministers on the front bench. I like them personally, but it is simply not good enough for the Prime Minister not to pick up the phone to the First Minister. He picked up the phone to me about issues at my Celsa plant when he was Chancellor. So why is he not doing that now to the First Minister? Where is the Secretary of State? She has not been speaking to the Welsh Economy Minister, Vaughan Gethin. She needs to put aside the partisan differences and get around the table and work with us to find solutions on this. She's not doing it. And where's the Chancellor? Now, fundamentally, he's been involved in this deal, which appears to be delivering very little. Where is he on this? They need to get with the programme. Mr Deputy Speaker, we need to look at that multi-union-led plan. We need to listen to what our unions are saying, listen to what the workers are saying, not make irreversible decisions, and make sure there is a future for the steel industry in this country.
Richard Thompson.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Firstly, allow me to express my concerns on behalf of the 2,800 workers who at Port Talbot who will lose their jobs, and the many others in that community and surrounding area that will also feel the knock-on ramifications of this decision. Now, that's a situation that all too many communities in Scotland and indeed right across the UK remember from the toxic industrial legacy of the government's policy in the 1980s, where the rapid enforced decline of heavy industry across too many places was progressed with. Now, that toxic legacy gives us a prime example, if we needed one, of how not to go about an industrial transition. But it seems that with the rejection of the multi-union plan, that no lesson has been learned in that regard by the present-day government. For make no mistake, this decision is economically, environmentally and strategically inept. It means that the UK takes a step closer to being the only state in the G20 without a capacity to make its own virgin steel. That's a risk to security. It also means it's effectively outsourcing the emissions associated with the production of that virgin steel, but unforgivably also offshoring the jobs. Now, that is not a just transition, Mr Speaker. It's just plain daft. Now, the green transition that we know we need to make ought to be a main driver of economic growth in the decades ahead. And we can see in the EU and in the US how governments which get to grips with that challenge can drive forward that investment. In contrast, in Port Talbot, we can see a £500 million UK government investment leading to the direct loss of 2,800 jobs. Now, that's a transition of a sort, I suppose, but it's not one that comes anywhere close to meeting the needs of the communities there, the economy or the planet. Finally, if I could say as gently as I can to the Labour front bench, if decarbonisation is not to mean deindustrialisation, then please, please, please have a word with your leader and make sure he doesn't water down any further his £28 billion pledge, because communities that depend on getting the transition right, like mine, deserve and expect no less.
To resume his seat no later than 6:44. Ruth Jones.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And it is good to participate in this debate, but it is not good to recognise the thousands of jobs losses coming down the track and the devastating effect this will have on our local communities. We cannot underestimate the anxiety and anguish this callous announcement by Tata and the lack of thought by the UK government in just going along with it. And not just the direct job losses, but the thousands of other workers and families involved in the supply chain of the steelworks in South Wales. This is a massive blow for everyone across Wales and the UK. And it's all the more frustrating because we know that this decision to shed 2,800 jobs is completely avoidable. Yes, we know that the steel industry has to decarbonise and we must achieve our goal of net zero, but we don't have to do it overnight. We can transition to green steel. Decarbonisation cannot mean industrialisation. The route to green steel involves a mix of all technologies available, not just electric arc furnaces. We will move towards our goal of net zero, but in partnership and cooperation, leaving no one behind. That is the fair way. That is Labour's way. In contrast, this government is so deaf to the problem that the Prime Minister wouldn't even answer the phone to the First Minister, Mark Dwyfor, when he rang to discuss the proposed job losses. That tells you volumes about how ready to listen this government is. And while we're thinking about government responses, will the Minister meet with the unions? Because I believe the last meeting was way back in May 2023. It'd be good to have a commitment there. The Minister. So there is also a knock-on effect, because whilst we are mainly concerned with jobs in Port Talbot today, there will be an impact on its sister site Llanwern and Newport East in my honourable friend's constituency. Many people in Newport West also work in Llanwern, and let's not forget the other steel companies such as Island Steel and Sims Metal Recycling, who are also suffering because of a lack of coherence and strategy from the current UK government. It's unbelievable. Like all of the speakers on these benches, I pay tribute to the union representatives here in the public gallery today, and I thank them for their diligence and proactive working. I call on the UK government to engage with them and work with Tata to ensure that the UK retains its steel production capabilities and ensures our automotive, defence, manufacturing, construction and renewable industries are able to procure and use our own British steel. Thank you.
Very much. The wind-ups. Sarah Jones.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. This has been a powerful debate, reflecting the huge strength of feeling in this place, but also the huge knowledge and the ambition for our steel industry. I was very disappointed that the Minister came to this place and said this debate was performative, less than a week after Tata Steel announced nearly 3,000 job losses. I think we all would have expected better from her. Like many others today, I met this afternoon with steelworkers and union officials from Port Talbot, but also from across all the other steel sectors, across steel sites from across the country, who have come because they know what this means for them and their future. These actions will have consequences beyond last week's announcement. The steelworkers here today, like many of us, are baffled by the government's approach. They know that steel is a foundation industry. They know how crucial it is to our economy. They know that the world is uncertain. For goodness sake, the Prime Minister was here only this afternoon talking about strikes on Houthis in the Yemen, and that having our own supply of primary steel is crucial to our security. The question we all have genuinely is why this government is so content to be spending £500 million on a scheme that leads to thousands of job losses and a scheme that risks, as my honourable friend, the Shadow Secretary of State, I will give way to him, yes.
I thank her for giving way. On the question of jobs, she will have seen, of course, that every steel industry across the planet, across the G20, is going through massive change. But the only place where there's a threat of thousands of job losses is in the United Kingdom. Why does she think that might be?
My honourable friend is absolutely right, and he made a brilliant speech earlier and has been a great defender of his constituents. And I think the lack of any plan from this government over the last 14 years is at the heart of the problems that we see today. And we risk, as my honourable friend, the Shadow Secretary of State, said in his opening speech, something much wider here today as well, that net zero becomes a net-sum game for working people and we lose the public consent we need for the transition. There is no getting away from the facts. This government has pushed a plan that uses hundreds of millions of pounds to make thousands of people redundant. And if Scunthorpe ends up going in the same way, and the Honourable Lady made a powerful speech to the contrary, we will be unable to produce primary steel in the UK. In the Port Talbot plan, the 2 blast furnaces are shut this year. It's a cliff edge for jobs. And for at least 3 years, steel is completely imported from India and the Netherlands to feed Trostre and Llanwern in South Wales, but with no guarantee that once the electric arc furnace is built, those jobs will stay. We know there are huge questions around scrap steel and whether that will produce the steel that we need. And many members today have asked questions, including the chair of the Select Committee, that the government has provided so far no answer to. I will give way.
I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady for giving way. I didn't have an opportunity to develop it in my speech, but would the Honourable Lady and the party support a development corporation to diversify the economy so that it's not so dependent on one industry and one company?
Well, the Labour Party would support an industrial strategy which would have a myriad of plans beneath it that would look exactly at some of these issues, and our National Wealth Fund that would be funding some of the really important future industries that we need, that would crowd in private sector investment at a much greater scale and hopefully lead to the manufacturing industry growing and not the managed decline that we've seen under this government. My honourable friend from Aberavon said this plan is exporting jobs and importing carbon, and he is exactly right. My dad was from Llanelli, once the tinplate capital of the world. My granddad worked at the tinplate factory that was called then Richard Thomas and Baldwin, and his brother worked at Salters, the saucepan works. They would have stood in Stradey Park singing Saucepan Foch, bursting, I am sure, with pride. Britain's steel industry has seen us through momentous periods in Britain's national story. The white heat of the Industrial Revolution, the planes, ships and tanks that saw us through the Second World War, and the buildings dotting our skyline across this modern Britain. But if we get nostalgic for the past, we don't look to the future. The world is changing. It's less safe, less secure, and steel is changing. New technologies are transforming how we make and use steel, and it will be as crucial to our future as it has been to our past. We can't make solar power without steel. We can't make electric vehicles without steel. We can't make wind turbines without steel. We won't reach the Paris Climate Agreement without steel. Steel is used for 3D printing, robotic automation, everything from the tools our doctors use to save our lives to the rocket ships reaching into space need steel. Our pens are made of steel, and Big Ben ticks because of steel. Anyone who doesn't know its magic should read Ed Conway's book, Material World. Steel makes the machines, the tools, the factories that make everything else possible. It will forge our future, not just our past. So today is not about nostalgia, it's about looking ahead. And on this side of the House, we know that steel can have a bright future in Britain. Mr Deputy Speaker, the government's last-minute chaotic deal is a masterclass in how not to run the transition. What the government offered was never a serious plan for the long term of our steel industry. It was yet another sticking plaster from a government lurching from crisis to crisis, unable or unwilling to take a long-term view. There are other ways forward. Labour has a cast-iron commitment to support our steel industry. We have earmarked up to £3 billion for investment in green steel alongside industry, working with steel communities to ensure the transition comes with jobs. There are other ways forward, not least hydrogen, that can help us. While the Conservatives scramble around for last-minute deals, Labour will make long-term investments. That is the central difference in our approach. We have to think about manufacturing differently. I've lost track of the number of times businesses have said to me, we would be investing in renewables, but the government makes it too hard. Or our manufacturers say, we want to decarbonise, but we're living hand to mouth because our energy bills are so much higher than other countries and government won't help us. So this steel debacle speaks to a much wider issue. We don't just need a steel industry, we need glass, ceramics, cement, compost, critical minerals, batteries, composites, cheap energy. We need supply chains that work, we need an upgraded national grid, we need planning reform, we need a job plan to create jobs across every part of this country, a transition from the old to a much cheaper renewable future. In short, we need an industrial strategy. We need a government that believes in working in partnership with industry and not just telling them to F off, and we need a plan that looks to the future of our own country and doesn't just rely on cheap imports from China. Mr Deputy Speaker, we are asking the government to think again, to look at the multi-union plan again, to think about how to defend primary steel capacity in our country. Mr Deputy Speaker, we know that there are steel workers watching this debate tonight who must feel wretched. So I ask the members opposite in all sincerity, are you concerned about our defence capabilities if we lose the capacity to make primary steel? Do you really think the government's plan is money well spent? Should decarbonisation really be about cutting jobs? Is manufacturing really a Victorian pursuit best left to the Chinese, as a former Tory Prime Minister is reported as saying? Or can we, as the great country we are, harness the skills and talents of our people and create a vibrant manufacturing sector here in the UK? So tonight, Can we send a message to the steel workers here that we want to protect the future of British steelmaking and we will not sit by and let managed decline be the hallmark of this great British industry? And I commend this motion to the House.
Yeah. Secretary of State. Mr Deputy Speaker, can I thank the Honourable Lady and all those who've taken part in this debate today? And can I say very, very, very clearly, Mr Deputy Speaker, I completely understand how devastating this news is. I understand the devastation that people will be feeling in Port Talbot, the whole of the community, but especially those people who face the loss of their jobs and those in the wider supply chain, because of course there'll be a wider impact. Nobody's denying it, nobody's running away from that whatsoever. Mr Deputy Speaker, let me just set out the situation the government found itself in. Throughout this debate, honourable members have tried to suggest this is a government decision. This is not a government decision. It's not the government that decided to close. Yes, Mr Deputy Speaker, let me just make a little progress because we've only got about 6 minutes, and I think honourable members will want me to put things on record. Can I say to the honourable member for Perry Barr, he waved around the Syndex plan. As a member of Unite, surely he will be aware that they actually rejected it. Mr Speaker, let me just go back to what the situation we found ourselves in was. It was not a decision of the government to shut down the blast furnace. It was a decision taken by Tata in light of the losses that they were making. I will to the honourable gentleman. Yeah.
Secretary of State for giving way. Yes, it's a Tata decision, but there's £500 million of British taxpayers' money going into it. Could the Secretary of State just set out what red lines did the government put down around that £500 million? Were there any red lines around jobs?
Anything. Down to this. The government had to find the solution that was acceptable to Tata, that was going to save the maximum number of jobs. The government are not paying £500 million to throw 3,000 people out of work. The government, no, Mr Speaker, Mr Deputy Speaker, the government are paying £500 million to save 5,000 jobs, because 5,000 jobs will be saved and around 12,500 jobs will be saved in the supply chain. Honourable gentleman, I will give away to the honourable gentleman because he knows more about this than many who spoke today. But the reality is that Tata were telling us that they were looking to pull out completely from the United Kingdom. If 3,000 jobs is devastating, and it certainly is, how much more devastating would 5,000 jobs be and 12,500 jobs in a supply chain? It was a simple choice for the government. It wasn't a good choice. It was a choice between see 3,000 people losing their jobs or see around 17,500 people losing their jobs, possibly even more than that. And that is why the government committed to pay £500 million towards an arc furnace. But let me make one other thing clear, Mr Deputy Speaker. The government are not going to pay a penny to Tata until that arc furnace is built.
Giving way again, he's being very generous. I think there's many reasons why Tata would not be considering full closure, not least the multi-billion cost of closing down the Port Talbot steelworks, and the remediation cost would be absolutely astronomical. So that was never on the table. The choice was between the bad deal that the government's done with Tata and the compelling multi-union deal. So could we please just have the facts on the table, which are, this is not about closing the plant versus the government's deal. This is about the multi-union deal being the right way forward.
Honourable gentleman's position on this, and he's right to be standing up for his workers. So this is the reality of the situation, that plan has not persuaded Tata. Tata have not said it's credible. Tata have said to me that they could not go along with that plan because although one of the blast furnace 4 has a number of years to run, they would still come to the end of the life of the coke plant and the sintering plant. And that therefore, if they went ahead with that proposal, they would keep one blast furnace open, which is still losing a lot of money. They would then have to start importing all of the coke and all of the sinter that they would need for it. And then there is a technical problem that they say it would be very difficult indeed to build an arc furnace next to a working blast furnace containing molten steel. I mean, the honourable gentleman shake his head, but that is what they're saying to us. That is what they said to us as government, and that's why we find ourselves in the difficult situation, the unpleasant, the awful situation of having to choose between 3,000 people losing their jobs and 17,500 people losing their jobs. And that's why we came to the decision we did. No, may I just continue, because I've only got 3 minutes left. I want to say something about those 3,000 people. I worked in a steel plant myself. I worked in Llanelli when I left school, so I am directly involved in this. I feel that. And I want to say to the workers, I've met with the trade unions on a number of occasions. I'm happy. In fact, I will cancel what I'm supposed to be doing next. I will go out there in the public gallery and meet with workers, with the honourable gentleman and anyone from the unions to explain that commitment. There is £100 million on top of the £500 million, which is going to be there for that community in Port Talbot. It's going to be there to develop infrastructure to get other companies in. But more importantly, and the most important thing, the honourable gentleman knows I've said this in the Transition Board meetings, is to ensure that anyone and everyone who loses their job has the absolute maximum opportunity to retrain and to do anything that they want to do as far as retraining is concerned, to help set people up in businesses, to get them licences, to get them any training they want. There is a massive commitment from the UK government to that, and we are not going to turn our backs on the people of Port Talbot. I will give way very quickly.
Grateful to my right honourable friend for giving way, and he's making an extremely powerful factual case rather than some of the wilder claims that have been made. Is he aware, bearing in mind this is a devolved responsibility, is he aware of any capital sums that the Welsh Government are making available in order to support the community?
Mr Deputy Speaker, the Welsh Government have made it clear they're not able at the moment to put in the sort of money that would be needed to come up with any kind of a different plan. There is no other plan on the table. And that is why we find ourselves in the situation we're in. Can I very quickly turn to a couple of points that were made? Firstly, the whole issue of primary steel, virgin steel. Obviously, all of the iron ore and all of the coal which is used in that plant is being imported. We are therefore, at this very moment, dependent on other countries for our virgin steel capacity. And the advantage of an arc furnace, although it's not a situation I want to be in, is that we wouldn't be dependent on foreign countries for that supply of steel, because as my right honourable friend has pointed out, there are 8 million tonnes being exported at the moment. There is an issue, I think I better keep going because I've got 1 minute left. The issue of defence, none of the steel being produced in Port Talbot is going into the defence industry, but the defence industry does use steel from Sheffield Forge Masters, which is created by an electric arc furnace. There is an issue over the quality of the steel historically that comes out of an arc furnace, but all of the experts have told me that it is getting better and better all of the time. Tata expect to be able to supply about 90% of the products that they currently supply from the blast furnace through an electric arc furnace. There is exciting technology being developed at the moment using hydrogen instead of coal or coke to reduce iron. But there's only one plant doing it at Luleå in Sweden. It is completely experimental at the moment. There is a podcast on the BBC somewhere with the chief executive being interviewed, making it clear that it's 25% more expensive than the steel being produced in a conventional blast furnace at the moment. So good luck with trying to persuade Tata that they should get rid of producing steel from in the usual fashion and replace it with something that is 25% more expensive. The reality is, now I know my time is up, the plan which the right honourable members have waved around has not been put to Tata by the Labour Party.
The question is the question being output. As Mayor say aye. Aye. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The question is as on the order paper. As Mayor say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. No. Division. Clear the lobby. Order, order. The question is as on the order papers. May I say aye? Aye. Or the contrary, no? No. Tell us for the ayes, Jeff Smith and Christian Wakeford. Tell us for the noes, Holly Lynch and Andrew Weston. Lock the doors. Order. Order.
The ayes to the right, 223. The noes to the left, none.
Thank you. The ayes to the right, 223. The noes to the left, nil. So the ayes have it. The ayes have it. I'm not.